India witnessed a historic moment on 22nd January 2024. Ram Mandir Ayodhya, known as the birthplace of one of the most significant god of Hindus, Lord Ram, finally got its Ram temple again at the site called the Ram Janmabhoomi. This was a generational struggle for Hindus and Ram Bhakts since the 1500s. So understandably, color and celebrations across India. Diya lamps were lit in the evening at the ghat and houses across the states in the country. Neon lights, laser shows were also done, events were organized. Many called this as a civilizational moment that they were witnessing in their lifetime. Similar emotion was seen and felt in other countries too, where members of the Hindu community live. This was a global moment. So, there was the global media reportage. But most in international media, the usual suspects, documented not this beautiful moment of smiles and happiness among Indians, but misinformation and bias, mainly with words and headlines of fear, frenzy, controversial, raised mosque, communal tensions and Hindu supremacy in India. New York Times headlined its report. Modi inaugurates the giant temple, a triumph toward Hindu-first India of Hindu nationalists. In the subheader, it said, the temple inaugurated by the Prime Minister is on the disputed site of a centuries-old mosque destroyed in a Hindu mob attack that set a precedent of impunity in cases of violence against Muslims. Why this misinformation, disinformation campaign? Disputed site? And why did you miss the 2019 Supreme Court verdict? Did you miss the legal hearing and the constant fight for decades in the court? Because the temple was built as per court orders, after legal scrutiny for years. But the report starts not with the emotions and relief or the tears of the devotees when the doors of the temple opened, but how foot soldiers since the 1990s fanned across the country for the temple that now defines Hindu supremacy. The BBC headlined its report, Indian Prime Minister inaugurates the Hindu temple on raised Babri Mosque site. The report starts and focuses on Hindu mob, the mosque raised, and Prime Minister Modi's electoral gains ahead of 2024 elections. Sprinkled in between somewhere through the article are some celebrations in different parts of the country by Hindus. Then the BBC video report goes on to focus on Muslims in fear. Any celebration by Hindus are juxtaposed by the 1992 demolition in the next frame. There is nothing in the report on the young car sevaks that were killed and shot dead, thrown in the Saryu River by the Uttar Pradesh police on government orders in 1990. No mention of a generational struggle and years of fight and wait, or simply what Ayodhya Vasis may have to say at this moment for what this means to them as living in Ram Nagari, which finally gets the temple after hundreds of years again. Washington Post, the WAPO, headlines with the report. Controversial temple caps years-long campaign. The destruction of the mosque had triggered deadly riots in 1992. Raised mosque, raised mosque, raised mosque in the headlines. Not quoting as the focus of how generation after generation kept alive accounts in written and verbal that this was the site of the most important deity for most Hindus, most Indians, and on this site was built the Babri Mosque. Babur, a Mughal invader, could get a mosque constructed in his name anywhere across the occupied territories. But the chosen location was what Hindus had believed as the Ram Janmabhoomi, where the Ram temple had stood as the birthplace of their god. What was the reason of the construction of the mosque is anyone's guess. The temple is being built after a Supreme Court verdict, after a legal fight that had started during the British era. Petitions after petitions, more petitions were filed. Does a fascist supremacist majority wait for a court fight for decades to build their most important temple? That is what was done by the Hindus of this country in majority. But the examples across the world on a similar issue will show you otherwise. Consider DW News' recent video. The title itself states, why India's Ram Mandir temple inauguration is so controversial. The narrative throughout the report conveniently skips the extensive archaeological evidence recorded in pictures by journalists on the ground back then. I interviewed a photojournalist based in Ayodhya, Mahendra Tripathi, who had clicked vital images when excavations were taking place at the site where murtis or the Hindu idols were taken out and documented. All of this was submitted in the court and taken cognizance of. Archaeologists have repeatedly mentioned this, but sadly all of this was conspicuous by absence in foreign media reporting. People across the world would not know much about India's internal matters or its history details, and they will believe this narrative and in turn have such a poor view of the Indian people. Let me show you. Meet this community, the Suryavanshi Thakurs, a group that has finally worn a turban on their head after 10 generations at least. Turban is a mark of respect and status for this group and similar groups across India from the Hindu community. They are based in Ayodhya, and the Suryavanshis say that their ancestors with other community members fought against Mughal army commander Mir Baqi's army when the original Janmabhoomi in Ayodhya was seized, and the Babri mosque was built on this to show as an act of subjugation and the conquerors, the invaders that Mughals were. These people, after their battles were fought and lost, took a vow to not cover their head till their Lord Ram had a cover on his head. They followed this pledge generation after generation. They had tears when I met them, when a grandson, a teenager, finally got to put a turban on the head of the grandfather. There were cheers that the village had erupted in. This was the Indian sentiment. But the foreign media nowhere reflected these images. The DW reporter instead said, political stunt, Hindu Rashtra gimmick, and the Muslims are in fear. DW continued to play into this fear and division with videos like these, stating communal tensions are stirring in Ayodhya. But if you were to be in the city, in the alleys of Ayodhya, a different story was unfolding. Hindu and Muslim community members who possibly saw this as a fresh start to peace after years of conflict and tensions were working hand in hand on the temple and in celebrations, trying to weave a tapestry of communal harmony. Muslim artists were singing Ram bhajans across the country. They were crafting their art on the pillars for the temple. They were feeling happy for their Hindu brethren. But if you were to watch foreign media, you would not see that. You would in fact be shocked at what it says India is seemingly becoming into. The problem with foreign media at this point, especially the usual suspects, is some of them did go to Ayodhya, but not to document what the emotions were of largely the population, but a predetermined narrative against even a historic celebration. Did they even try to understand why so many houses, not just in Ayodhya, but across the country in different parts of the world, have lights and lamps and public kitchens and smiles and collective happiness? This was not hateful bigotry. To many Indians, they said they feel alive as the identity of their land, of their culture, their existence, their history, felt it was finally being reclaimed and revived. On a side note, India is rising on the economic ladder as the fifth largest economy. The International Monetary Fund is appreciating India as the only bright spot on the dark horizon. India overtakes Hong Kong as the world's fourth largest stock market, crossing $4 trillion for the first time since 5th December. But The Economist said this, using words like also Hindu chauvinism in India that will lead to economic stagnation. Al Jazeera, that is run from Qatar, quoted words like frenzy and fear in the headlines of how a mosque demolition in 1992 had hit India's social fabric. This was while the elderly in Ayodhya, who had lived their life just like their generations prior, waiting to see the temple again. They were eagerly waiting to see the Ram temple in their lifetime open doors. But the Al Jazeera in fact quoted an author to say, this felt like the tensions of 1947 partition violence all over again, that there is inter-religious hate being seen. Whereas on the ground, it was a stark opposite. I would in fact say this, that this Ram temple has ended years of long communal campaigns, a potboiler for heated, ugly debates that were a constant presence in Indian discourse. Finally, an issue that was being used regularly by both political divides to stoke emotional fire of Hindus and Muslims to get votes ahead of elections for their parties could have possibly ended forever. The issue is dead. Indians can with hope now move forward socially and politically. Far from being a symbol of division, this Ram temple can actually emerge as a catalyst for not just social rejuvenation but economic revival and resurgence too. The fact is, international media, when reporting on Kashmir, do not elaborately document the minority Hindus whose temples, ancient temples, were demolished and desecrated, who continue to face horrors by extremists even today. And when reporting on Ayodhya, they do not elaborately record majority Hindus who celebrated after a long time their history, past, present and future. Also, you would have noticed, neither the Prime Minister Narendra Modi nor the RSS chief nor the Hindus on the ground were shouting anti-Muslim horrific communal slogans while the Pran Pratishtha ceremony was on. In fact, there were bhandaras or public kitchens were being organized across the country to do social service and seva. In fact, members of the Sikh community, Muslim community, other community members saw this as a possibly moment of communal harmony and got in unitedly together, celebrating this as a moment. As I conclude, my friends, sure, criticize the government and politicians when needed. It's a fair part of the job. It is important to expose if there are systems wrongdoings and if there are critical voices, because everyone does have a right to express views and emotions. But at this moment, to not respect the sentiment that was across the country, in other countries, a moment of collective happiness, of documenting this civilizational revival, the moment that many said felt like an awakening to them, a moment many Indians said they will not forget, the collective smiles that was seen and felt from north to south, of happiness, of peace, of not hatred, of not bigotry. This should have been the crux and focus of reporting. And yet, the international media largely documented such a positive, beautiful moment of India with such viciousness. Thank you for watching.